The sound of craft beer splashing across worn denim made every head in the Anchor Point bar turn toward the commotion. Saturday night, 10:15 p.m. and the establishment was packed with the usual crowd: veterans, active duty personnel, contractors who'd seen things they'd never talk about in polite company. Oops, my bad, sweetheart. Commander Dutch Maddox stood 6'3" in his navy dress, blue shoulders broad enough to block out the neon Budweiser sign behind him. His crew-cut blonde hair caught the bar lights as he looked down at the woman sitting alone. That trademark smirk playing across his face, the expression of a man who'd never been told no in his entire 39 years. The beer had soaked through completely. Gray scrubs, the kind trauma nurses wore during the long shifts that broke most people, now darkened to charcoal. Golden liquid dripped onto the bar stool, pooling on the scarred wooden floor that had absorbed 1,000 spills before this one. Brennan Kincaid didn't look up immediately. 35 years old, auburn hair twisted into a messy bun with loose strands framing a face marked by exhaustion, deeper than any 14-hour emergency room shift could explain. Her gray eyes, the color of storm clouds over the Pacific, remained fixed on her smartphone for another 3 seconds, finishing whatever she was reading. Not because she hadn't noticed the beer, not because she hadn't heard the commander's condescending tone, because she was choosing her battles. When she finally set the phone down on the polished oak bar top, the movement was deliberate, controlled. The kind of economy of motion that came from somewhere deeper than yoga classes or self-defense seminars. Her hands reached for the napkin dispenser, pulling out a small stack and with the methodical precision of someone dressing a wound in triage. This ain't a place for civilians, baby. Maddox leaned in closer, bourbon fumes rolling off him in waves. His 5 SEAL teammates erupted in laughter behind him, that pack mentality that turned good men into something uglier. Anchor Point is for real warriors. Maybe you should head on home. Watch some Netflix. Do whatever it is girls like you do. The entire bar watched. Over 60 patrons, mostly military personnel and veterans, abandoning their pool games and conversations to witness the show. In the age of viral content, phones began sliding out of pockets. Screens lit up in anticipation. Someone in the corner booth started a live stream. This was entertainment. This was what happened when cocky SEALs had too much to drink and found an easy target. Brennan blotted the beer with slow, measured movements. Patent, press, fold, patent. Press, fold, like she was controlling bleeding. Her breathing remained steady, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way they'd taught her in basic, the way she'd practiced during the 26 hours that had redefined what human endurance meant. Maddox laughed louder, mistaking her silence for fear, for weakness. Hey, I'm talking to you. His hands shot out fast, the grab of someone used to physical dominance, used to people flinching when he moved. His fingers clamped down on Brennan's left wrist, right over the faint circular scar that looked suspiciously like an old bullet wound. The kind that went clean through, the kind that should have killed her. Later, when the video went viral, and it would 30 million views in the first 72 hours, analysts would slow it down frame by frame. They'd mark the exact moment Commander Dutch Maddox made the biggest mistake of his decorated career. The moment his skin touched hers. What happened next took 1.8 seconds. Brennan's right hand moved first, covering Maddox's grip. Not pulling away, not struggling, controlling the point of contact. Her body rotated counterclockwise as she stood, weight shifting from the bar stool to her feet in one fluid motion. Her left arm bent at a precise angle, 90 degrees mechanical perfection, and suddenly Maddox's own momentum was working against him. The joint lock was textbook. The kind taught at Fort Bragg to Delta Force operators. The kind that didn't appear in civilian self-defense videos on YouTube. Maddox's face hit the bar top with a solid thunk that silenced every conversation in the room. His arm twisted behind his back at an angle that made several onlookers wince. His cheek pressed against the oak where his beer had been sitting 30 seconds earlier. 220 pounds of Navy SEAL commander completely immobilized by a woman 7 inches shorter and probably 90 pounds lighter. And Brennan hadn't even put down her water glass. She held him there for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to make the point short enough to avoid permanent damage, then released him and sat back down as if absolutely nothing had happened. Picked up her phone, unlocked the screen, continued reading where she'd left off. The bar existed in a pocket of absolute silence. Master Chief Grant Ellis, sitting in the corner booth nursing his 3rd whiskey of the night, set his glass down with a sharp click that somehow carried across the entire space. 52 years old, 28 years in the teams before retiring, and he'd learned to recognize certain things. The way Brennan had transitioned from seated to standing, the precise angle of that arm lock, The weight distribution that kept a man twice her size completely neutralized. Those weren't moves learned in a weekend seminar. That was muscle memory drilled through thousands of repetitions in environments where failure meant death. Maddox pushed himself up from the bar, face flushed, crimson, half embarrassment, half rage. He rubbed his wrist where Brennan's grip had left red marks. In all his years of training through BUD/S and advanced operator courses through missions in Iraq and Syria, he'd never been taken down that quickly, that cleanly. Water, please. Brennan's voice carried a slight Midwestern accent that softened the edges of her words. Neutral, professional, like she was ordering coffee, not sitting next to a man she'd just humiliated in front of his entire team. With ice. Jake McAllister, the bartender, stood frozen with a glass in his hand. Former Army Ranger, 45 years old, sleeves of military tattoos covering both forearms. He'd been working the anchor point for 6 years, had seen every kind of military posturing and civilian confrontation imaginable. Bar fights between drunk Marines, pissing contests between different units. Once a full-scale brawl between SEALs and Green Berets that had required 8 MPs to break up. But this was different. The woman's request for water instead of alcohol. The way her eyes had already cataloged every exit before she'd even sat down. The fact that she'd assessed and neutralized a threat without spilling a drop from the glass in her other hand. These were habits that couldn't be taught in any gym. That was Krav Maga, came a slurred voice from the corner. Thompson, a grizzled Army veteran in his 50s wearing a faded 82nd Airborne jacket, swayed slightly as he stood. His eyes, though glazed with alcohol, held the sharpness of someone who'd seen combat in places the news never reported on. Military Krav Maga, not the watered-down gym version they teach soccer moms. Bullshit. Dmitry Volkov's voice carried the thickness of a Slavic accent, each word slightly too precise. The private military contractor was built like a refrigerator, 250 pounds of muscle earned in conflict zones where the rules of engagement were suggestions rather than laws. 48 years old, ex-Spetsnaz, and he'd spent the last 2 decades doing things governments needed done, but couldn't officially sanction. Lucky grab is all. Little nurse probably watched YouTube tutorial. The word nurse rippled through the crowd like a wave. Someone had recognized Brennan from Coronado Medical Center. Had seen her in scrubs rushing a gunshot victim into surgery. The narrative quickly formed in the collective consciousness of the bar. A tired healthcare worker had somehow gotten lucky against an elite operator. The crowd's tension eased slightly. This made sense. This fit the world they understood. It was acceptable, not threatening to the natural order. Marcus, the bouncer, moved closer to the developing situation. 6'4" former Marine face scarred from an IED that had torn through his Humvee outside Fallujah. But Master Chief Ellis raised one hand subtly and Marcus paused. Something in the old SEAL's expression suggested this needed to play out. The door chimed as someone new entered. Elena Martinez rushed in, still wearing her Coronado Medical Center ID badge clipped to her jacket. Her eyes found Brennan immediately, and concern flashed across her face. She'd worked alongside Brennan in the ER for 4 years now. Had seen her handle everything from gang shootings to multi-car pileups with a calm that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than medical training. Had seen Brennan's hands shake sometimes late at night when the trauma bay was empty and the adrenaline wore off. Jess, Elena started, then caught herself. Stopped. Because Brennan had given an almost imperceptible shake of her head. A signal that said, not now, stay back. Let this happen. Elena found a seat at the bar close enough to help if needed, far enough to avoid escalating whatever was developing. Maddox had recovered his composure, now falling back on the bravado that had carried him through countless missions. His teammates flanked him, 2 on each side, forming a loose semicircle that effectively trapped Brennan between them and the bar. It wasn't overtly threatening. They were too well trained for such obvious intimidation. But the message was clear. You got lucky, Maddox announced, his voice carrying throughout the bar. Needed everyone to hear this. Needed to reclaim some dignity. But luck runs out. How about we settle this properly, arm wrestling? Right here, right now. Let's see what you've really got when it's strength against strength. His teammates cheered the suggestion. This was familiar territory, a contest of pure power where technique mattered less than raw muscle. Maddox had never lost an arm wrestling match in his team. His biceps were the size of most people's heads, forearms corded with muscle from years of specialized training. Brennan took a sip of her water. Ice clinked against the glass. No, thank you. Scared, Captain Sloan Hartford interjected, her voice carrying that particular brand of condescension reserved for civilians who didn't understand military hierarchy. 41 years old, blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She'd spent 15 years fighting to be taken seriously in a male-dominated field, had endured harassment and discrimination to earn her place. And now she was looking at another woman who apparently wanted the same respect without putting in the work, without earning it the hard way. I don't blame you, Hartford continued. Taking someone by surprise is one thing. Facing them in a real contest is another. The crowd was growing now. Other patrons had abandoned their pool games and darts to form a loose circle around the developing drama. Someone had started a second live stream. Multiple phones captured every angle. In the age of viral content, a confrontation between a Navy SEAL and a civilian in a military bar was social media gold. The algorithm would love this. Tell me something. Brennan turned slightly to face Hartford, those gray eyes steady and unrevealing. Third phase of BUD/S training, week 5. What's the standard procedure for underwater knot tying when your dive buddy experiences shallow water blackout? The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Too specific, too detailed. The kind of information that didn't appear in documentaries or recruitment videos. The kind of knowledge that came from being there, living it, surviving it. Hartford's confident expression faltered. Just for a moment, just long enough for everyone watching to notice. How would you know about? Because the procedure they're teaching is wrong. Brennan continued, her voice never rising above conversational level. Calm, clinical. The tone of someone discussing a medical diagnosis, not calling out a naval officer. The recovery position they mandate increases the risk of secondary drowning by 30%. Any special operations medic who's actually dealt with blackout scenarios in combat diving operations would know that. Jake had stopped polishing glasses. His hands rested on the bar, recognizing the precision in Brennan's words. This wasn't internet research. This wasn't secondhand knowledge gleaned from books or documentaries. This was operational experience. Prove it. Jake reached under the bar, pulling out a Glock 19, unloaded, used for the concealed carry classes he taught in the back room on Tuesday nights. You talk like you know weapons. Let's see it. Field strip this. How fast can you do it? Brennan glanced at the pistol, then back at Jake. 11.3 seconds with proper tools, 14 without. 14 seconds, Jake scoffed. The range record at Anchor Point was 17 seconds, set by a SEAL Team 6 operator 3 years ago. Everyone knew the story. It had become legend. Show me. Brennan picked up the Glock with her left hand. Her right hand still held the water glass, condensation forming on the outside ice slowly melting. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms, analyzed frame by weapons experts and military enthusiasts worldwide. Her movements were economical, precise, almost boring in their efficiency. No flourish, no showing off. Just the systematic disassembly of a weapon by someone who had done it so many times that muscle memory had replaced conscious thought. The slide came off, the barrel lifted free, the recoil spring assembly separated. Each component was placed on the bar in a perfect line, oriented exactly as military armorers were trained to arrange them. Methodical, professional, like she was performing surgery. 11.4 seconds, Isham. Jake announced, his voice carrying a mix of disbelief and respect that he couldn't quite hide. With one hand. The bar had gone completely silent, except for the classic rock playing softly through the speakers. Even the pool players had stopped mid-game. Rodriguez stood frozen, his challenge of arm wrestling, forgotten in the face of a display that suggested depths none of them had considered. You smell like death. Thompson announced this loudly, weaving closer, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Brennan with the intensity of someone recognizing a kindred spirit in darkness. Not hospital death, the other kind. The kind that clings to you in places where the Geneva Convention is just toilet paper, where the rules don't matter because nobody's watching, and the only law is survival. That's enough, old man, Volkov declared, standing from his table. His massive frame cast shadows across the floor as he approached. 250 pounds of muscle and scar tissue, and bad decisions. Smart-mouth nurse needs lesson in respect. In my country, we have way of dealing with women who forget their place. The tension in the bar ratcheted up another notch. This was moving past posturing, past ego. This was becoming something uglier. Marcus, the bouncer, moved his hand closer to the baseball bat kept behind the entrance. Elena half rose from her seat, medical training, already calculating response times for potential injuries. But Brennan remained perfectly still. Only the slight adjustment of her feet beneath the bar stool suggested she was even paying attention. When Volkov moved, it was with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight that mattered. His grab was textbook, private military contractor, direct, brutal, designed to establish immediate physical dominance. His hand reached for Brennan's shoulder, intending to spin her around to force her to confront him directly, to make her understand that you didn't disrespect men like him without consequences. The next 4 seconds would be discussed in combat forums and military analysis blogs for years to come. Brennan didn't block the grab. Instead, she moved with it, using Volkov's own momentum against him in a display of physics and leverage that made Newton's laws look like divine intervention. Her body rotated, her weight shifted, and suddenly the massive contractor found himself off balance. A foot swept his ankle with surgical precision. An elbow found his solar plexus, not hard enough to cause permanent damage, just hard enough to make his diaphragm spasm. Cut off his oxygen supply. By the time his brain processed what was happening, he was already on the floor, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Brennan hadn't stood up. She was still seated on her barstool, water glass in hand, as if the entire sequence had been nothing more than swatting away a persistent fly. But those watching closely, and the cameras caught everything, saw details that told a different story. The way her feet had repositioned, the micro adjustments in her posture, the fact that she'd struck 3 specific pressure points in a sequence that spoke of advanced close-quarters combat training, the kind taught at Fort Bragg, the kind that didn't have an open enrollment, the kind reserved for America's most elite warriors. "Who taught you that?" The voice came from the entrance where Colonel Garrett Thorne had just arrived with 2 younger officers. He was old-school military. 67 years old, the kind of officer who had earned his rank in places the news never reported, on doing things that would never appear in official records. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, his faded Gulf War veteran cap worn with the casual pride of someone who'd actually been there. His eyes still sharp, despite his age, still capable of the 1,000-yard stare fixed on Brennan with the intensity of a predator recognizing another predator. Brennan turned slowly to face him. For the first time since the encounter began, something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not concern, but a weariness that suggested she'd hoped to avoid this exact moment. The colonel stepped closer, his aides flanking him. The bar patrons parted like the Red Sea. This wasn't just any officer. This was Colonel Garrett Thorne, legendary Delta Force commander during the Gulf War, the man who'd led operations that changed the course of Desert Storm, the man whose name was spoken in hushed tones in team rooms across the world. "I asked you a question." Thorne's voice was quiet, but carried to every corner of the now silent bar. "That takedown, that's not standard close quarters combat. That's not even special operations standard. That's something else entirely." Master Chief Ellis was already on his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. His weathered face had gone pale beneath its permanent tan. He'd recognized something in that 4-second sequence. Something that connected to briefings in rooms where recording devices were forbidden and names were never used. Something classified beyond top secret. Maddox had found his courage again, bolstered by the presence of senior command. He moved to stand with his teammates, forming a loose semicircle that effectively trapped Brennan between them and the bar. Not overtly threatening, they were too well trained for such obvious intimidation, but the message was clear. This conversation wasn't ending until they had answers. "Everyone who's served has a call sign," Maddox announced loud enough for the entire bar to hear. His confidence was returning now that he had backup, had witnesses, had authority on his side. "If you're who you claim to be, some kind of operator, then you'll have one. So let's hear it. What's your call sign?" The phones were all pointed at Brennan now. The live streams had thousands of viewers. The comment sections exploded with speculation. This moment, whatever was about to happen, would be preserved forever. Analyzed, debated, shared across platforms until it became part of military folklore. Brennan set down her water glass with deliberate care. The ice cubes clinked against the sides, the sound somehow carrying in the tense silence. She looked at Maddox, then at Hartford, then at Colonel Thorne. Her gray eyes held something that made even these hardened warriors unconsciously shift their stances. Something that suggested they'd made a terrible mistake. "I don't have a call, son," she said finally. "Bullshit." Hartford's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Everyone in special operations has a call sign. It's not optional, it's part of the culture, the identity. You're lying." The crowd murmured agreement. This was common knowledge in military circles. Call signs were as fundamental to military aviation and special operations as ranks and serial numbers. They were earned through notable events, embarrassing moments, or characteristics that defined an operator among their peers. To claim advanced training without a call sign was like claiming to be a surgeon without knowing what a scalpel was. Outside, through the bar's tinted windows, a black SUV screeched to a halt in the parking lot. The engine was still running. Someone inside was making a phone call that would change everything about to unfold in the Anchor Point bar. Maddox pressed closer, his fellow SEALs flanking him. They had Brennan surrounded now. 5 elite operators forming a human wall between her and any exit. The message was clear, direct, unambiguous. This conversation wasn't ending until they had the truth. Last chance, Maddox said, his voice dropping to a growl that suggested consequences. Tell us your call sign or we're going to assume you're just another wannabe trying to play soldier. And trust me, we don't take kindly to stolen valor in this establishment. The atmosphere in the bar had shifted from entertainment to something more primal. This wasn't just about a confrontation anymore. This was about identity, honor, the sacred boundaries that separated those who had served from those who merely claimed to. The crowd watched with the intensity of spectators at a gladiatorial match, waiting to see if the mysterious woman would reveal herself or be exposed as a fraud. Brennan stood up slowly from her bar stool. At 5'6", she should have been dwarfed by the SEALs surrounding her. Instead, something in her posture and the way she planted her feet and squared her shoulders made her seem larger, more dangerous. Like a compressed spring containing energy that could reshape the entire room if released. She looked directly at Maddox, her gray eyes holding his with an intensity that made him want to step back. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the now silent bar. Wraith 6. The effect was immediate and devastating. Maddox had been raising his beer bottle to his lips, a gesture of dismissive confidence, as he waited for what he assumed would be another lie. The bottle never made it. His hand froze mid-motion, the muscles in his arm locking as if electrocuted. The beer slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, falling in what seemed like slow motion. The bottle hit the floor with a crash that shattered the silence. Golden liquid spread across the worn wooden boards, mixing with foam as the bar erupted in chaos. But Maddox didn't move. He stood frozen, his face draining of color so quickly that Elena, with her medical training, moved instinctively closer in case he fainted. Holy Mother of God. Master Chief Ellis's voice cut through the shock. His phone clattered onto the table as he took an involuntary step backward. 28 years of special operations experience. Missions in every conflict zone on the planet, and he looked like he'd seen a ghost. The reaction rippled outward like a shockwave. Hartford's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with the kind of recognition that came from classified briefings and need-to-know operations. Jake dropped the glass he'd been polishing, crystal shattering on the floor behind the bar. Even Colonel Thorne, who had maintained his composure through 20 years of combat operations, who'd stared down enemy commanders and made decisions that cost lives and saved thousands more, visibly staggered. No, Thompson gasped from his corner, falling to his knees with the gracelessness of someone whose legs had simply stopped working. His bloodshot eyes fixed on Brennan with something approaching religious awe. The ghost. You're the ghost of Firebase Valkyrie. Volkov, still struggling to breathe properly on the floor, managed to lift his head. Even through his pain, the recognition was clear on his face. In the private military contractor community, certain names transcended normal operations. They became legends, cautionary tales, benchmarks of what was possible when skill met will in the crucible of combat. Wraith 6 was one of those names. That's impossible. Colonel Thorne's voice lacked conviction despite the words. You died at Valkyrie. The whole unit was listed as KYA. I read the after-action report myself, classified above top secret. 8 operators went in, 0 came out. The bar had erupted. Phones that had been recording suddenly became the most important devices in the room. The live streams that had been expecting to capture a simple bar fight were now broadcasting something extraordinary. The comment sections exploded with disbelief, recognition, frantic searches for information about Wraith 6 and Firebase Valkyrie. Every phone in the bar was now pointed at Brennan. The various angles would later be compiled into a single video that would rack up 30 million views in its first 48 hours. The moment when a tired emergency room nurse was revealed to be something else entirely, something legendary. The front door of the Anchor Point burst open with enough force to make everyone jump. The hinges protested. Glasses rattled on tables. Conversations died mid-word. Colonel Thorne stood in the doorway, still in civilian clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt that did nothing to diminish the command presence that radiated from every fiber of his being. He was breathing hard, as if he'd run from his car. His eyes swept the room in a tactical assessment that took less than 2 seconds. They found Brennan, noted her position, the surrounding SEALs, the contractor still gasping on the floor. Then they locked onto her face and something profound shifted in his expression. Brennan met his gaze, and for the first time since the evening began, her carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. Her shoulders tensed. Her hands, which had been perfectly still throughout the entire confrontation, trembled slightly. Not with fear, with recognition, memory. The weight of a past that wouldn't stay buried. Colonel Hartford began, clearly confused by the sudden appearance of such high-ranking brass at what should have been a simple bar incident. "We have a situation here. This woman claims—" Thorne held up one hand, silencing the captain mid-sentence. He took 3 steps into the bar, his eyes never leaving Brennan's face. The silence was absolute now. Even the background music seemed to have faded into nothing. "Say it," Maddox demanded, emboldened by what he perceived as Brennan being cornered by the highest levels of military authority. His pride wouldn't let him back down. Not in front of his team, not with thousands watching online. "Tell everyone your call sign or admit you're a fraud." Brennan had already spoken it, but Maddox hadn't heard, had been too shocked, too disbelieving. Needed to hear it again to make it real. She looked directly at him, her gray eyes holding his with an intensity that made the temperature in the room seem to drop 10 degrees. "Wraith 6. This time everyone heard it clearly. 2 words, 8 syllables, a designation that shouldn't exist anymore, that had been buried with classified reports and redacted documents and 8 flag-draped coffins. Master Chief Ellis had his phone to his ear again, speaking rapidly. His face had gone pale. Around the bar, veterans who'd served in Afghanistan were pulling out their own phones, searching connecting dots, remembering classified briefings and rumors that had circulated through special operations communities for years. The ghost of Firebase Valkyrie. 197 confirmed kills. 26 hours. Impossible. Colonel Thorne moved forward and then did something that sent another shockwave through the bar. This decorated Gulf War veteran, this legendary Delta Force commander, this man who had led operations that changed the course of modern warfare, dropped to one knee in front of Brennan. "Master Sergeant Wraith," he said, his voice thick with emotion that he wasn't trying to hide. I'm so sorry I didn't recognize you immediately." The bar erupted again. Phones that had been recording suddenly became historical documents. The live streams that had expected entertainment were now broadcasting something that would be studied, analyzed, remembered. The moment when a ghost became real again. Every phone in the Anchor Point bar was now pointed at the kneeling colonel and the woman who'd just been revealed as something beyond comprehension. The live stream viewers had exploded into the tens of thousands. Comments scrolled faster than anyone could read them. Frantic searches for Wraith 6 and Firebase Valkyrie crashed military forums across the internet. Commander Maddox sank onto a bar stool, his massive frame suddenly looking deflated. The beer from his dropped bottle had reached his boots, but he didn't notice. His mind was struggling to reconcile the woman in front of him with the stories he'd heard in classified briefings. Stories that had seemed like myths. Urban legends whispered in team rooms after the new guys had gone to bed. 197 confirmed kills. The number hung in the air like a physical presence, heavy and undeniable. "You're the only female operator to ever complete Delta Force selection." Captain Hartford's voice came out as barely more than a croak. The professional composure she'd maintained throughout her 15-year career had shattered completely. She wiped at her face, unaware of the tears. "The only woman to serve as a primary sniper for Joint Special Operations Command. Operation Valkyrie, October 19, 2016. Master Chief Ellis found his voice, though it carried the weight of someone who'd lost friends in that desert. Classified as the single most successful failed operation in the Special Operations history, 8 Delta operators inserted to extract 52 NATO personnel from Firebase Valkyrie before Taliban overrun. Intelligence said moderate resistance, 40 to 60 enemy fighters. The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet of moments before. This was the silence of recognition, of understanding that they were in the presence of something extraordinary, something that had been hidden in plain sight. Colonel Thorne stood up slowly, his knees protesting the movement. Age and rank hadn't diminished his physical presence, but the emotional weight of the moment was clear on his weathered face. He turned to address the bar, his voice carrying the authority of command developed over 4 decades of service. "What you're about to hear doesn't leave this room." He paused, knowing that ship had already sailed. The live streams were broadcasting to hundreds of thousands now, but some things needed to be said anyway. Some truths needed to be spoken, regardless of who was listening. Master Sergeant Brennan Kincaid, callsign Wraith 6, is the most decorated female operator in United States military history. And until 8 years ago, she didn't officially exist. The silence held. Even the background music had stopped. The universe itself seemed to be holding its breath. Brennan remained standing, her posture unchanged despite the weight of every eye in the room. The tremor in her hands from earlier had stilled. She looked exactly like what she'd been pretending to be a tired healthcare worker at the end of a long shift. Except now everyone could see what had been hidden beneath the surface. The way she stood with perfect balance despite apparent exhaustion. The scars on her forearms that weren't from medical accidents, but from battlefield wounds. The thousand-yard stare of someone who'd seen humanity at its worst and chosen to spend her life trying to heal rather than harm. Operation Valkyrie. Thorne's voice took on the cadence of a military briefing, though emotion bled through the professional delivery. October 19th, 2016, Eastern Afghanistan, Helmand Province. 8 Delta operators inserted to extract 52 NATO personnel, aid workers, contractors, embassy staff from Firebase Valkyrie. Intelligence estimated light resistance. Minimal enemy presence. He paused, swallowing hard against memories that still haunted him 8 years later. Intel was wrong. 750 Taliban fighters. Heavy weapons. Mortars, RPGs. Coordinated ambush. The firebase was surrounded before our team even landed. Around the bar, veterans who'd served in Afghanistan felt their blood run cold. 750 to 8. Those weren't combat odds. That was a death sentence. The fact that anyone had survived, let alone completed the mission, defied every principle of tactical planning. Thorne continued, his voice steady despite the emotion. 6 operators were killed in the first 20 minutes of the firefight. Direct RPG hit on the command bunker. They never had a chance. Never even got their weapons up. The weight of those words settled over the bar like a shroud. Maddox looked like he might be sick. Hartford had given up trying to hide her tears. Even Volkov, finally able to breathe normally, had managed to prop himself up against the table, his expression one of profound respect. Master Sergeant Kincaid held that firebase for 26 hours. Thorne's voice cracked slightly on the number. Alone, against an entire Taliban battalion. She saved all 52 personnel, got them to the extraction point, provided cover while they loaded onto helicopters. And she did it after watching her entire team, her family, die in front of her. Around the room, phones were lowered. Somehow it felt obscene to keep recording. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was sacred ground. This was the kind of story that deserved to be heard in silence, remembered with reverence. Brennan spoke for the first time since revealing her call sign. Her voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the silent bar. The voice of someone who'd learned that the dead deserved to be named, to be remembered as more than statistics. Ryland. The single name carried weight, memory, pain compressed into 3 syllables. Sergeant First Class Ryland Blake. She continued, her gray eyes focusing on something beyond the walls of the bar, beyond the present moment, beyond the 8 years she'd spent trying to forget. Team leader, 32 years old, married, 2 daughters ages 4 and 6. He was Colonel Thorne's protege, trained under him at Fort Bragg for 3 years. Best tactical mind I ever worked with. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, more human. The clinical detachment slipping to reveal the grief beneath. Blake took a grenade blast meant for me in the first 15 minutes. We were setting up the sniper position, heard it land, looked at each other, and he just moved, covered my body with his. Didn't hesitate. Didn't think about his wife or his daughters or the life he was leaving behind. Just moved. Thorne's face was wet now. No shame in the tears. No attempt to hide them. These weren't tears of weakness. They were the price of remembering, of honoring the dead by feeling their loss. Blake died instantly. Brennan said, her voice taking on that clinical tone again, the way trauma surgeons talked about catastrophic injuries to maintain emotional distance. But before he did, in those last seconds, he handed me his rifle scope, custom built, engraved with "For Ironside's Legacy." Ironside was the colonel's call sign during the Gulf War. Blake carried that scope through every deployment, said it was his good luck charm. She reached up, touching the rifle scope that wasn't there anymore. Muscle memory from 8 years ago. He told me to finish the mission. His exact words, "Finish the mission, Hawk, get them home." That was his nickname for me. Said I flew like a hawk when I was on the rifle. Predator vision, patient, deadly when it mattered. Jake had moved from behind the bar to stand with the other patrons. His bartender's professionalism forgotten in the face of this testimony. This communion of warriors sharing the weight of sacrifice. The other 5 operators, Brennan continued listing names like a prayer, like remembering them was the only thing keeping them alive. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera, Sergeant William Grant, Sergeant Thomas Hayes, Corporal David Sullivan, Specialist James Peterson, all killed within 20 minutes. RPG strikes, sniper fire. Hayes took a mortar round directly. There wasn't enough left of him to identify without DNA. The brutal honesty of that last detail made several people flinch. I carried Rivera to cover, Brennan said. He was still alive, gut shot, bleeding internally. I knew he wouldn't make it, but I tried anyway. Set up my rifle position with him next to me. Talked to him while I worked. Told him about the shots I was taking, the targets I was eliminating. Kept him conscious as long as I could. Her voice wavered for the first time. He asked me to tell his mother he wasn't scared. But he was. We both were. Terrified. And I lied to him. Told him help was coming. That medevac was 15 minutes out. That he'd be fine. He died knowing I'd lied. Died holding my hand while I took shot number 43. The raw honesty in her voice made the moment almost unbearable. This wasn't a sanitized war story. This wasn't glory or honor. This was the truth of combat. Messy, brutal, heartbreaking. The intelligence failure wasn't just numbers, Brennan said, her voice hardening. It was catastrophic, deliberate. 750 Taliban fighters who'd been preparing for weeks. Mortars pre-sighted on the firebase. Ambush positions established. Supply caches positioned. They knew we were coming. Someone told them. Someone in the intelligence chain sold us out. Master Chief Ellis spoke up, his voice rough with anger that hadn't faded in 8 years. The after-action investigation was classified beyond top secret, above my clearance level, above almost everyone's, but rumors circulated through the community. Suspicions that someone in the intelligence apparatus had deliberately sent that team into a trap. Used those 52 civilians as bait. Thorne nodded slowly, his jaw tight. The investigation is still ongoing. 8 years later, still classified, still no official conclusions. But yes, we believe it was intentional. Delta Force operators don't walk into ambushes like that. Not with our intelligence capabilities. Not with our resources. Someone wanted that team dead. We just don't know who or why. The implications of that settled over the room like a toxic cloud. 8 of America's best warriors sent to die. 52 civilians used as bait in a game they didn't even know they were playing. And somewhere, someone who'd orchestrated it all was still walking free, still breathing, still unpunished. I held the sniper position for 26 hours. Brennan said, her voice distant now, lost in memory, reliving every moment of those 26 hours of hell. Firebase Valkyrie was built on high ground, good defensive position, clear lines of sight, excellent fields of fire. Blake had chosen the spot before he died. He always had an eye for terrain. The position gave me 360-degree coverage. I could see everything. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was quieter, almost wondering, as if she still couldn't quite believe she'd survived. They kept coming, wave after wave. I'd take a shot. Someone would fall, and 3 more would take his place. For the first 6 hours, I thought I was going to accepted it, made peace with it, started thinking about what came next, if there was anything next, if my parents would ever know what happened to me. But then I looked down at the firebase, saw the 52 people huddled in the bunker below my position, terrified. Some of them were medical personnel, teachers, engineers, people who'd come to help, who'd believed they'd be safe, who'd trusted us to protect them. Her hands gripped the edge of the bar knuckles, white with the force of memory. There was this boy, 18 years old, Luca Brenner, Austrian kid. His father worked for the UN. His mother was Afghan. Luca had grown up in Vienna but came to Afghanistan to help his mother's people. Worked as an interpreter. Spoke German, English, Pashto, and Dari fluently. Brilliant kid. Wanted to study medicine. Had this whole plan to become a doctor and come back to help rebuild Afghanistan's healthcare system. Brennan's voice softened with the memory, the clinical distance dropping away. His sister Nina was there too. 16 years old. Beautiful girl. Smart. Brave. She'd caught shrapnel in the first attack. Femoral artery. She was bleeding out fast, and Luca refused to evacuate without her. Just sat there in the bunker, holding pressure on the wound, talking to her in German, keeping her conscious, keeping her alive through sheer force of will. Around the bar, hardened warriors found themselves leaning in, caught in the story despite themselves, despite the horror. because this was what mattered. This was why they served. Not for glory or medals, but for moments like this. For kids like Luca and Nina, who deserved a chance to live. I called down to the bunker on Rivera's radio, Brennan said. Told them to send Nina up, that I had medical training, that I could help. Luca carried her up himself, through mortar fire, through sniper rounds. This skinny 18-year-old kid carrying his 110-pound sister up a rocky slope while bullets kicked up dirt around him. He never hesitated, never faltered, just kept moving. She smiled slightly at the memory. It was the first time anyone had seen her smile all night. A brief moment of light in the darkness of the story. I operated on her right there in the sniper tower, between shots. I'd put down the rifle work on Nina for 30 seconds, pick the rifle back up, take out whoever was advancing. Put the rifle down, back to Nina. Used a combat trauma kit and Ryland's KA bar knife. No anesthesia, no proper surgical tools. No sterile field. Just pressure cauterization and prayer. Nina didn't scream, not once. Just gripped Luca's hand and stared at the ceiling while I cut into her leg. Pulled out shrapnel. Sealed the artery with field cauterization. This 16-year-old girl had more courage than most soldiers I'd served with. And Luca, Brennan's voice caught again. This kid watched me work. Watched me cut into his sister. Pull out metal fragments. Burn the wound closed. And he said in perfect English, with this Austrian accent, "You are very brave, miss. I will be brave like you." The bar was silent except for Brennan's voice. Every person present was living the moment with her, feeling the weight of it. He was 18 years old, watching his sister nearly die. Taliban fighters trying to kill us all. Mortars landing close enough that the concussion made my ears bleed. And he was trying to comfort me, trying to be brave for me, trying to help. Thorne stepped forward, his voice gentle despite the command presence. You saved all 52 of them. Every single person made it onto those helicopters. The extraction was 30 hours late. Brennan said, her voice flat again, reciting facts to avoid feeling them. Communications were cut. The Taliban had Russian-made jammers. Military-grade equipment that shouldn't have been there. I had to use a civilian satellite phone. One of the aid workers had it to call in artillery strikes. Danger close. Some rounds landed 50 meters from my position. The concussion alone should have killed me. She touched her neck absently where the faint scar was visible, even in the dim bar light. I got hit, multiple times, shrapnel mostly, but one round 7.62 millimeter, probably from a Dragunov, went through here. She indicated the scar on her neck. Missed my carotid by maybe 3 millimeters. Should have bled out in seconds. Would have. But I'd taken combat medic training seriously. Practiced self-aid under stress, trauma scenarios, mock injuries. I packed the wound while still engaging targets. Used quick clot gauze and pressure. Kept fighting. Jake spoke up, his voice carrying genuine awe. How many rounds did you fire over 26 hours? 2,347. Brennan replied without hesitation. The number was burned into her memory. I counted every single one, had to, needed to know when I was running low. When to conserve ammunition. When to make every shot count even more than it already did. I scavenged ammunition from the dead operators, from Taliban fighters I'd killed who got close enough to the position. By hour 20, I was down to 3 magazines, 75 rounds, against 700-plus enemy fighters still in the valley. And that's when the helicopters finally came. Thorne said, his voice thick with emotion. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. You provided covering fire for the entire extraction. Took out 17 more Taliban fighters while the civilians loaded. Was the last person to board. Literally had to be pulled onto the helicopter because you wouldn't leave your position until every civilian was accounted for. And the moment her feet left Afghan soil, Ellis added quietly, she collapsed, went into shock, crashed hard. Brennan nodded. 71 wounds. The medic report became legendary in military medical circles. Classified but legendary. Shrapnel from multiple sources. Bullets. Burns from artillery that landed too close. Blast injuries from RPGs that hit near the position. Dehydration, exhaustion, blood loss. I died twice during the medevac flight. Flatlined. They had to shock me back both times. Don't remember much of it. Just fragments, voices, pain, the sound of the helicopter rotors. Someone saying, "Stay with us, Wraith, stay with us." Woke up 4 months later at Walter Reed under the name Jane Mercer. Classified patient. No visitors allowed. No records that could be traced. Just endless rehabilitation and debriefings and psychological evaluations. Doctors telling me I'd never walk normally again, that the nerve damage was permanent, that I should accept my limitations. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Took me 8 months to prove them wrong, another 4 to get cleared for active duty. But by then, she trailed off. By then, everyone you'd served with was gone. Thorne finished for her. Your team was dead. Your identity was classified beyond existence. The military had a choice. Bring you back into active duty and risk exposing the intelligence failure. Risk questions about who'd sold out that mission. Risk a congressional investigation that could bring down careers and expose operations. Or let you disappear. So Master Sergeant Brennan Kincaid died in that valley. Brennan said, her voice carrying acceptance rather than bitterness. And I became just Brennan, a civilian, a nurse, someone who saves lives in emergency rooms instead of taking them on battlefields, someone who tries to balance the scales. The profound nature of that transformation from the most lethal sniper in special operations history to an emergency room nurse wasn't lost on anyone present. It was a rejection of everything that had defined her, a choice to heal rather than harm, to build rather than destroy. Brennan's modified smartphone rang, cutting through the moment like a blade. The ringtone was distinctive, not a civilian sound, something military, something urgent. She pulled it from her pocket, not a normal phone. Even from across the bar, people could see it was different. Ruggedized case, encrypted display, the kind of device that cost $5,000 and required security clearance just to own. She looked at the caller ID, and her face drained of what little color remained. She answered on the second ring. Blackjack. The voice on the other end was audible only to her, but whatever was being said made her jaw tighten, made her free hand grip the edge of the bar hard enough that her knuckles went white, hard enough that the old bullet wound scar on her wrist stood out against pale skin. When she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor that had returned to her hands. A pause while she listened, while information was delivered that changed everything. How many hostages? Another pause. Longer this time. More details. Worse news. Understood. Send me the intel package. Full satellite coverage. Real time if you've got it. She ended the call and stood there for a moment, the phone hanging loose in her hand. The bar waited, sensing that something fundamental had shifted yet again. That the night wasn't over. That the revelation of Wraith 6 was just the beginning. That was Langley, Thorne said. It wasn't a question. Only one organization could put that particular expression on the face of someone who'd stared down 750 enemy fighters without flinching. Only the CIA called themselves Blackjack in operations that didn't officially exist. Brennan nodded slowly. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, professional, but underneath something was breaking. Something was tearing open wounds that had never properly healed. Luca Brenner, the boy from Valkyrie, he's 26 now. She corrected herself immediately, muscle memory making her precise even in crisis. Runs an orphanage in Kabul with his sister Nina. They take in kids who've lost parents to the war. Street kids, orphans, kids nobody else wants. Teach them, feed them, give them hope, give them a future. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was harder, colder. The voice of Wraith 6, not Brennan the nurse. Taliban grabbed him 48 hours ago, took Nina, took 11 kids from the orphanage, ages 12 to 17. They're demanding ransom, but she stopped, shook her head. It's not about money. It's about Mimao. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. The boy whose life Brennan had saved at the cost of everything she was now needed saving again. And this wasn't random. This wasn't opportunistic kidnapping. This was personal. They want him as leverage, Maddox said, understanding dawning like a sick realization. To draw you out. Brennan pulled up the intel package on her phone, projecting it onto the bar's wall screen with a gesture that spoke of practice, of familiarity with classified technology. The image showed a man in his mid-50s, traditional Afghan garb, graying beard, eyes that suggested he'd seen too much death and learned to enjoy it. Commander Yusuf al-Hakim Shayin, Brennan said, her voice carrying recognition. History, old hatred meeting new threat. He was the Taliban ground commander at Firebase Valkyrie, the one who coordinated the attack, who planned the ambush, who positioned 750 fighters to kill 8 Americans. She swiped to show more intelligence photos. Al-Hakim through the years, getting older, getting harder, building power in the Taliban's military structure. He watched through binoculars for 26 hours while I held the line. Watched 750 of his fighters fail to take one American position. watched his carefully planned ambush turn into a slaughter. 197 of his men dead, the rest demoralized, defeated by a single American operator. Thorne stepped closer to the projection, studying the face with the intensity of someone cataloging an enemy. I know this man, from Gulf War intelligence briefings. He was younger then, mid-20s, fought against the Soviets in the 80s, against us in the 90s during Desert Storm, disappeared after 9/11, thought he was dead, reemerged in Afghanistan around 2014. He's been tracking me, Brennan said, swiping to show more intelligence. Communications intercepts, surveillance reports, pattern analysis. For 8 years, CIA picked up chatter 6 months ago. Al-Hakim had become obsessed with the ghost sniper, the woman who'd humiliated him, who'd killed 197 of his fighters and walked away, who'd survived when she should have died. She swiped to the next image, a fortress compound in mountainous terrain, high walls, guard towers, surrounded by high ground that would make any assault a nightmare. And something about the layout was familiar, disturbingly familiar. He rebuilt it, Ellis breathed, recognition hitting him like a physical blow. That's Firebase Valkyrie. He rebuilt the exact same firebase where you held the line. 23 kilometers from the original location. Brennan confirmed, her voice clinical again. Detached, the only way to deal with the psychological warfare of it. Same basic design, same defensive positions, same fields of fire. He studied my tactics, learned from them, analyzed every shot, every decision, every mistake. The satellite imagery was detailed enough to show individual buildings, guard positions, patterns of movement. Al-Hakim hadn't just rebuilt Firebase Valkyrie, he'd improved it, strengthened it, turned it into a fortress specifically designed to kill Wraith 6. This is a trap, Thorne said flatly, his strategic mind already analyzing the tactical situation. He knows you'll come, he's counting on it. He's had 8 years to prepare this, to game out every scenario, every approach, every possible tactic you might use. I know, Brennan replied. Her voice was calm, too calm. The voice of someone who'd already made a decision and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. The voice of someone who'd died twice on a medevac helicopter and learned that death held no fear anymore. Only duty mattered. Only the mission. Maddox stood up from his bar stool. The man who'd humiliated her 90 minutes ago now looked at her with something approaching reverence. With understanding born from his own years of service, his own missions where the odds were impossible and success wasn't guaranteed. You can't do this alone. You're not active duty anymore. You're a civilian, a nurse. You save lives in hospitals, not in places where hospitals don't exist. Not against 75 Taliban fighters in a fortress designed to kill you. Brennan turned to face him fully. The quiet nurse was still there somewhere, but now everyone could see what lay beneath. The operator who had redefined what was possible in modern warfare. The warrior who'd held the line when holding the line was mathematically impossible. You think I chose emergency medicine by accident? Her voice was soft but carried an edge that could cut through steel. Every gunshot wound that comes through those doors. Every trauma victim bleeding out on my table. Every person who should die but doesn't because I refuse to let them. I see my team. I see the 52 civilians I saved. I see Luca whispering in German that he'll be brave. And I try to balance the scales. She paused, letting the weight of that sink in. But the scales never balance, Thompson said from his position against the wall. Despite his intoxication, he'd found clarity in this moment. Understanding born from his own demons. His own nights waking up in cold sweats, seeing faces that wouldn't fade. They never do. Not for people like us. We carry it all. Every life saved, every life taken, every choice, every consequence. The weight never gets lighter. We just get stronger at carrying it. Hartford wiped her face with the back of her hand, her military bearing reasserting itself through the tears, through the emotion. What do you need? The question represented a fundamental shift in the room's dynamics. These weren't antagonists anymore. They were potential allies drawn together by the recognition of something greater than ego or pride. Drawn together by the understanding that some fights transcended personal grievances. That some battles demanded every warrior stand together, regardless of past conflicts. Brennan looked around the room, taking in the faces watching her. SEALs who had moments ago been trying to humiliate her. A contractor who tried to physically dominate her. Officers who'd questioned her very existence. And in every face, she saw the same thing. Understanding, recognition that Luca Brenner, that boy who'd carried his wounded sister up a rocky slope through enemy fire, deserved the same chance Brennan had given him 8 years ago. Deserved warriors who'd fight for him the way he'd fought to stay brave. I need to make a call, she said finally, and then I need to disappear for a while. 72 hours, maybe less. Thorne nodded, his strategic mind already working through logistics, through resources, through the network of contacts built over 40 years of service. Whatever you need, full support, unofficial of course. Officially, Wraith 6 is still dead, still buried in classified reports. She needs to stay that way, Brennan agreed, at least on paper. But for the next 72 hours, the ghost walks again. Ellis stepped forward, pulling a worn challenge coin from his pocket. It wasn't his seal coin. It was something older, more worn, with markings that predated the War on Terror. Delta Force insignia faded but still visible. My cousin was there, he said, simply placing the coin on the bar in front of Brennan. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera. You knew him as Ghost. Brennan's hand hesitated over the coin. When she picked it up, her fingers traced the worn edges with the reverence of someone handling a holy relic, touching a piece of a man who died while she counted kills. He talked about his family constantly, she said softly, memory flooding back. Had pictures of his nieces and nephews taped inside his helmet. Showed them to me during the flight in. Said his cousin was going to be the best Master Chief the Navy ever had. Said you'd make the family proud. He was right. The moment of connection between past and present, between the living and the dead, between who Brennan had been and who she'd become resonated through everyone present. This wasn't just about one woman's hidden identity anymore. It was about the bonds that connected all of them, the invisible threads of service and sacrifice that transcended rank and rivalry and branch of service. The understanding that they were all part of something larger than themselves. Outside, more vehicles were arriving. The parking lot of the anchor point was filling with black SUVs and unmarked sedans. Whatever Brennan's phone call had set in motion was happening fast. Resources were mobilizing. Resets were being activated. The machinery of official action was grinding into motion. I should go, Brennan said, moving toward the door with that same economical efficiency. No wasted motion, no hesitation. But Maddox stepped forward, not aggressively this time, not blocking her path, just standing there with the uncertain movements of someone approaching a dangerous animal they'd accidentally provoked. Someone who understood they'd crossed a line and needed to make it right. I'm sorry, he said, and the words seemed to physically pain him. A man like Maddox didn't apologize often, didn't admit fault easily. His pride was built on being the best, on never backing down, on never showing weakness. I'm sorry for the beer, for the disrespect, for trying to break you down in front of everyone, for being too blind and too arrogant to see what was right in front of me. He paused, struggling with words that didn't come naturally. I should have seen it, the way you moved, the discipline, the knowledge, the control, all of it screamed operator, but I let my ego blind me. Let my prejudice about civilians, about women, keep me from seeing the truth. I dishonored myself tonight, dishonored my team, dishonored everything I claimed to stand for. Brennan studied him for a moment, then surprised everyone, including Maddox, by placing a hand on his massive shoulder. Despite the size difference, despite the fact that he outweighed her by 90 pounds and had 6 inches of height on her, it was Maddox who seemed smaller in that moment. You're a good operator, she said, her voice carrying conviction rather than platitude. Your file says so. 3 bronze stars, 2 purple hearts. Multiple successful operations in Iraq and Syria. 7 years in the teams. Spotless record. You're good at the boss, Commander Maddox. Very good. She paused, letting that sink in before delivering the harder truth. But being good at the bomb isn't the same as understanding what the one costs, what it takes from you, what it leaves behind. Tonight you learned something important. The question is what you do with that lesson. Whether you let it change you, or whether you go back to being the same man who spilled beer on a stranger to prove he belonged in a warrior bar. She moved past him, heading for the door. But Hartford called out, her voice carrying across the bar with command presence born from years of fighting to be heard in rooms full of men. Wait, the mission. Luca, you can't do it alone. Not again. Not against those odds. Not against a fortress designed specifically to kill you. Brennan paused at the door, her hand on the handle. When she looked back, there was something in her expression that made everyone in the room stand a little straighter. Something that suggested they'd just glimpsed the warrior who'd held Firebase Valkyrie for 26 hours against impossible odds. I've been alone for 8 years, she said quietly. But Luca isn't alone. He's got Nina, his students, his community, the kids he's saved from the streets. They're all counting on him to come home. Just like those 52 people counted on me to get them home 8 years ago. The difference is, Thorne said, understanding what she wasn't saying, this time you don't have to do it alone. This time you've got support, resources, a team. Unofficial support, Hartford added quickly, the career officer in her asserting itself even now. Completely deniable. No official records, no paper trail, but support nonetheless. We can help. We want to help. Brennan nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed gratitude, determination, and farewell all at once. Then she was gone, moving through the door with the same quiet efficiency she'd displayed all evening. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like finality. The bar remained frozen for several seconds after her departure. Then, as if a spell had been broken, everyone moved at once. Phones came out not to post on social media this time, but to delete recordings. The live streams cut off abruptly. Videos were erased, screenshots deleted. There was an unspoken understanding that what they'd witnessed needed to be protected, not exploited. That Wraith 6's identity was worth more than viral views or social media fame. Maddox stood staring at the door, his entire worldview reconstructed in the span of 2 hours. His teammates gathered around him, their earlier bravado replaced by something more thoughtful, more humble. "We're going to help," he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact, a decision that transcended orders or official channels. "We don't even know where she's going," Hartford pointed out, ever the practical officer, "or what the plan is, or if there even is a plan beyond walking into a kill zone." "Doesn't matter," Maddox replied, his voice carrying conviction. "We owe her. I owe her. For tonight. For what she did at Valkyrie. For every life she saved afterward, while we've been collecting medals and acting like we're God's gift to warfare. We help because it's right, because Luca Brenner deserves the same chance she gave him 8 years ago." Ellis picked up his challenge coin from where Brennan had left it on the bar. The metal was warm, as if it had absorbed something from her touch. Something of Marcus Rivera's spirit. Something of the bond that connected all of them across time and death. "I know people," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of 28 years in the teams. "People who remember Wraith 6, people who've been waiting 8 years for a chance to repay what she did, to honor the debt they owe to the ghost who saved their friends, their brothers, their family members who were in that firebase." Thorne had his phone out, already making calls. His voice carried the kind of authority that moved mountains and rearranged bureaucracies. The kind of authority that came from 40 years of making impossible things happen in shadows where official channels feared to tread. "I need a secure line to JASOC. Yes, now. Authorization code Tango 77 Valkyrie." He paused, listening. "I don't care what time it is in Washington. Wake them up. This is priority alpha." The transformation of the Anchor Point bar, from a scene of confrontation to an impromptu operations center, was remarkable. Tables were pushed together. Laptops appeared from cars and bags. Maps were pulled up on phones and tablets. Satellite imagery projected on walls. The same people who'd been ready to fight each other 2 hours ago were now working together with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Because that's what warriors did when the mission mattered. When lives hung in the balance. When one of their own needed help. Rivalries and egos and branch loyalty all fell away, leaving only the mission. Only the understanding that some fights demanded every hand on deck. "Listen up," Thorne announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the bar, cutting through conversations and phone calls and planning sessions. "What happened here tonight doesn't leave this room. The videos get deleted. The stories don't get told. As far as the world is concerned, Brennan Kincaid is still just an ER nurse who knows some self-defense. Wraith 6 stays dead, understood?" The chorus of agreement was immediate and absolute. Even Volkov, now back on his feet and nursing his bruised ribs, nodded firmly. This Russian, who'd spent 20 years fighting Americans in proxy wars, now stood ready to help protect an American operator's secret. Because some things transcended nationality. Some bonds were stronger than politics or history or old conflicts. Outside, Brennan sat in her 10-year-old Honda Civic, the engine running, but the gear still in park. Her hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough that her knuckles showed white in the dashboard light. The facade of calm she'd maintained throughout the evening finally cracked completely, and she allowed herself 60 seconds of vulnerability. 60 seconds to feel the weight of what she'd just committed to. 60 seconds to remember the faces of the 7 men who'd died at Firebase Valkyrie. 60 seconds to prepare herself to become Wraith 6 again. Her phone buzzed with the encrypted intel package from Langley. She opened it with a gesture, her trained eye absorbing the details with professional detachment. Satellite images of Al-Hakim's fortress compound updated within the last 6 hours. Thermal imaging showing guard positions and patrol patterns. Photos of Luca no longer the terrified 18-year-old she'd carried to safety, but a man with kind eyes and his sister's stubborn chin. Nina, now 24, defiant, even in the hostage photo, that same fire that had kept her alive through field surgery. 11 children between 12 and 17 scared but trying to be brave. Intelligence estimates put enemy strength at 63 Taliban fighters. Plus al-Hakim's personal guard, 12 Iraqi veterans, former Republican Guard professionals, who'd been fighting Americans since Desert Storm. 75 total hostiles. Against one operator, impossible odds. But then Firebase Valkyrie had been impossible too. Her phone rang again. Thorne's number showing on the encrypted display. She answered without speaking. Let him say what he needed to say. You've got 12 operators ready to roll, he said, without preamble, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who'd spent 2 hours making the impossible happen. All volunteers, all with Tier 1 experience. Maddox, Hartford, Ellis, 9 others you don't know but who know your legend. I'm coordinating with JSOC for equipment and transport. We'll have you boots down in Afghanistan within 72 hours. Unofficial, unsanctioned, completely deniable, but supported. Brennan closed her eyes, feeling something she hadn't experienced in 8 years. The weight of not being alone. The burden of other people's lives in her hands again. The responsibility of command. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because Wraith 6 saved 52 lives when everyone said it was impossible. Thorne replied, his voice thick with emotion. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. Because Master Sergeant Brennan Kincaid showed us tonight that some people are worth believing in, worth fighting for, worth dying for if it comes to that. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was softer, more personal. Because Luca Brenner was 18 years old and tried to be brave for you while you operated on his sister under fire. And now it's our turn to be brave for him. Our turn to carry him through hell, if that's what it takes. Our turn to prove that we learned something from your example. In the rearview mirror, Brennan could see operators streaming out of the anchor point, moving with purpose toward their vehicles. Maddox was among them, his phone pressed to his ear, coordinating something with the intensity of a man on a mission. Hartford was with him, her earlier antagonism transformed into determined efficiency. These were the same people who tried to humiliate her 2 hours ago. Now they were risking careers clearances, possibly their lives, because they'd learned the truth about who she was, what she'd sacrificed, what she represented. Tell them to stand down, Brennan said, but her voice lacked conviction. This isn't their fight. This is between me and Al-Hakim. Personal. He wants Wraith 6. Let him have her. With respect, Master Sergeant, Thorne replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice, despite the seriousness of the moment. That's not how this works. You showed us tonight what real service looks like, what real sacrifice means, what it costs to hold the line when holding the line is impossible. You don't get to carry that alone anymore. He paused, letting that sink in. Luca needs you, yes, but you need us, and we need this. The chance to be part of something that matters. The chance to save a life instead of taking one. The chance to prove that we're more than just shooters. That we learned something from the ghost who held Firebase Valkyrie. Brennan's hand moved to her neck, where dog tags hadn't hung in 8 years. Where the scar from a 7.62mm round still marked her skin. The weight of command, of responsibility for other people's lives settled back onto her shoulders like an old familiar burden, like coming home after a long absence. If we do this, she said slowly, carefully, each word weighted with the gravity of what she was accepting, we do it right. No cowboys, no glory-seeking, no unnecessary risks. We get Luca and Nina and those 11 kids out, and we all come home. Everyone comes home this time. That's non-negotiable. Roger that, Wraith 6, Thorne said, and his voice carried the relief of a commander who'd just received confirmation that his best operator was back in the fight. Everyone comes home. As Brennan put the car in gear and pulled out of the parking lot, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the rearview mirror. For just a moment, she didn't see the tired ER nurse who'd walked into the anchor point 3 hours ago. She saw the operator she'd tried to bury 8 years ago, the warrior who'd refused to die when death was the only reasonable option. The woman who'd learned that sometimes the hardest thing wasn't pulling the trigger. It was knowing when to stop pulling it. She saw Wraith 6, and somewhere in Afghanistan in a Taliban holding cell, 23 kilometers from where Firebase Valkyrie had stood, 26-year-old Luca Brenner sat in darkness, his sister's name on his lips, and a memory in his heart of a woman who'd carried him through hell 8 years ago and promised he'd see another sunrise. He didn't know that promise was about to be kept by the last person the Taliban expected to see again, a ghost from Firebase Valkyrie. Supported this time not by a team that would die for the mission, but by a team that would live for it, fight for it, and ensure that this time everyone came home. The scales would never balance completely. 197 lives taken could never be offset by however many lives saved. But Brennan was going to spend the rest of her life trying anyway. Starting with 13 hostages in a fortress designed to kill her. Starting with a boy who tried to be brave when bravery was all he had left. Starting now. 72 hours later, a nondescript cargo plane touched down at a classified airfield 40 miles from the Afghan border. The location didn't appear on any map. The flight logs would show a routine supply run that never happened, carrying equipment that was never there for a mission that would never be acknowledged. Brennan stepped off the ramp into the pre-dawn darkness, and for a moment the 8 years fell away completely. The smell of aviation fuel mixed with desert dust, the distant sound of rotor blades cutting through thin mountain air, the weight of tactical gear settling across her shoulders like an old friend she'd hoped never to meet again. She'd traded her scrubs for multicam fatigues that bore no insignia, no name tape, nothing that could identify her if things went catastrophically wrong. The fabric was stiff with newness, unlike the worn gear she'd left behind in a storage unit 8 years ago. But the rifle in her hands was familiar. Custom M110 SASS, semi-automatic sniper system. The same platform she'd used at Firebase Valkyrie rebuilt to her exact specifications. And mounted on top, carefully zeroed and calibrated, was Ryland Blake's scope, the one he'd given her with his dying breath. The engraving still visible in the starlight. For Ironside's legacy. Wraith 6. Welcome back to the sandbox. Colonel Thorne materialized from the shadows beside a line of vehicles. 67 years old, but moving with the careful precision of someone who understood his limitations and worked within them. He wore the same non-standard gear, the same carefully blank uniform. But unlike the others, he carried no rifle. Just a sidearm and a tablet loaded with intelligence data. Behind him stood 11 more figures. Maddox, Hartford, Ellis. 8 others who'd answered the call, not as active duty personnel, but as private citizens, taking a very dangerous vacation in a country where Americans weren't officially operating anymore. Sitrep, Brennan said, falling back into the clipped efficiency of military communication as naturally as breathing. Thorne unfolded his tablet satellite imagery glowing in the darkness. Luca's being held in the main compound, 23 kilometers northeast of our position. Same valley as the original Firebase Valkyrie. Al-Hakim chose the location deliberately. Wants you to remember. Wants you to feel it. Defenses. Brennan studied the imagery with the trained eye of someone who'd learned to read terrain like scripture. Heavy, Hartford replied, her voice all business now. The antagonism from the bar had been burned away by 72 hours of mission planning. Al-Hakim's got early warning positions here, here, and here. She indicated 3 ridgelines surrounding the compound. Any air assault gets detected 15 minutes out. He's expecting you, specifically you. They've been broadcasting messages for 3 days, Ellis added. Audio intercepts. Al-Hakim speaking directly to Wraith 6. Says the ghost of Firebase Valkyrie will watch another family die. He wants you to come. This whole thing is designed to draw you in. Brennan's jaw tightened, but her hands remained steady on the rifle. Hostage status. All 13 accounted for as of 6 hours ago, Thorne said, swiping to thermal imagery. Luca and Nina are being held in the central building. The 11 kids are in a separate structure. Guards rotate every 4 hours. 63 Taliban fighters total, plus Al-Hakim's personal guard, 12 Iraqi veterans, former Republican Guard. These aren't farmers with AKs. These are professionals. 75 total hostiles, 12 operators plus Brennan, 6-to-1 odds. Better than Firebase Valkyrie had been. What's the plan? Maddox asked, looking directly at Brennan. Not at Thorne, not at the senior officers, at her. Because despite his 3 Bronze Stars and years of experience, he understood that this was Brennan's operation. Her mission, her ghosts to confront. Brennan traced her finger along the satellite image, her mind already calculating angles, distances, probabilities. The compound was a fortress. High walls, limited access points, surrounded by high ground that provided perfect positions for enemy fighters. Al-Hakim had learned from Firebase Valkyrie, had studied her tactics, had built this place to kill her. Standard assault won't work, she said quietly. They'll execute the hostages at the first sign of approach. We need to make them think they've already won. What do you have in mind? Thorne asked, though something in his expression suggested he already knew. For the first time since stepping off the plane, Brennan smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who'd learned to turn traps into weapons. They want the ghost of Firebase Valkyrie, she said. Let's give them exactly what they're expecting. 48 hours later, as dawn painted the Hindu Kush mountains in shades of blood and gold, a lone figure walked across the valley floor toward Al-Hakim's compound. Brennan moved with deliberate slowness, her hands visible, and emptied her path, taking her directly toward the main gate. She wore no armor, carried no visible weapons, just walked with the measured pace of someone approaching their own execution. The Taliban fighters saw her coming from a kilometer away. Radios crackled with excited chatter in Pashto and Arabic, the ghost of Firebase Valkyrie, the woman who'd killed 197 of their brothers, walking into their fortress exactly as Al-Hakim had predicted. In hidden positions around the valley, 11 operators watched through scopes as Brennan played bait. Each had their assigned sectors, their specific targets, their moment to act, but everything depended on Brennan selling the deception. That she'd come alone, driven by guilt and desperation, to trade her life for Luca's. She reached the compound's outer perimeter where a line of fighters waited with weapons raised. One of them stepped forward, older than the others, his face bearing scars from old battles. "Wraith 6, he said in accented English. "The ghost who should have died with her team. You received our invitation." "I'm here for Luca Brenner," Brennan replied, her voice carrying across the morning air. "Let the others go. You want me. You've always wanted me. One life for 13. The commander laughed. "You think you have leverage. You walk into our home with nothing and demand terms." He gestured to the walls where more fighters appeared. "You will watch them die, all of them, starting with the boy." 17 seconds, Brennan said quietly. The commander leaned forward, confused. "What?" "That's how long you have to surrender," Brennan continued. 17 seconds before you understand what you've done. 16, 15, 14. The commander's confusion turned to rage. He raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Brennan's head. Around the compound, over 60 Taliban fighters tightened their grips on their weapons. 10, 9, 8. High above on a ridge, 800 meters away, Colonel Thorne lay beside Master Chief Ellis. Both men had scopes trained on different targets. Thorne's hands were steady despite his age. "All teams stand by," he whispered into his radio. "On Wraith's mark. 5, 4, 3. In the compound courtyard, visible through gaps in the wall, 13 hostages knelt with hands bound. Luca was there, his face thinner than in the photos. Beside him, Nina sat with defiant posture, and surrounding them, 11 children trying to be brave. 2, 1. The world exploded into precisely controlled chaos. Thorne's shot took the commander in the shoulder, spinning him away from Brennan. Simultaneously, 11 other rifles spoke from concealed positions. The Taliban's outer security collapsed in seconds. But Brennan was already moving. The moment Thorne fired, she rolled left, her hand finding the pistol concealed in the small of her back. 3 shots, 3 targets, each placed with the economy of motion that had made her legendary. She moved through the compound entrance like water flowing around rocks. Inside the fortress, alarms wailed. Fighters scrambled for positions, but their carefully planned trap had become a cage. Every exit they'd designed to prevent escape now channeled them into kill zones where Thorne's team waited. Brennan moved through the compound's interior with purpose, her mental map guiding her toward the prisoner-holding area. Behind her, the systematic elimination of resistance continued. She found the hostages in a courtyard exactly where intelligence had said they'd be. Luca saw her first, his eyes widening with recognition. "Fräulein Hawk," he whispered in German. "But they said you died." "Later," Brennan interrupted, producing bolt cutters from her vest. The zip ties fell away. "Can everyone move? Anyone injured?" Nina stood up, her leg bearing old scars from the surgery Brennan had performed 8 years ago. "We can move. Stay close. Stay quiet. Do exactly what I say." The extraction began smoothly. 13 civilians moving through a compound where resistance had been systematically eliminated. Maddox and Hartford provided cover. Ellis coordinated the withdrawal. They were 50 meters from the extraction point when everything went wrong. An RPG screamed out of a hidden position. The explosion caught Maddox's fire team in the open. The blast wave threw 2 operators to the ground. Maddox took the worst of its shrapnel, tearing through his tactical vest, punching into his right chest. He went down hard, gasping for air that wouldn't come. "Wraith man down," Hartford's voice cracked over the radio. Maddox hit bad, sucking chest wound. Brennan was ahead with the hostages almost to the helicopters. Safety was right there. The mission objective was complete. She could keep moving, get the civilians out, let the team handle their own casualties. That's what the tactical manual said. But Brennan had spent 8 years learning that manuals didn't account for the human cost. Get them on the birds, she told Hartford, already turning back. I'm getting Maddox. Brennan, no. Thorne's voice in her ear. The hostages need, you extract them. I'm getting Maddox. She covered the 50 meters in 14 seconds, sliding into position beside the fallen SEAL. His lips were turning blue. Blood frothed at the corner of his mouth. The chest seal had failed. The air was escaping into his chest cavity with every attempted breath. 4 minutes. Maybe 5. That's all he had. Brennan's hands moved with precision. Combat trauma kit open. Chest seal, the good kind vented, designed for exactly this injury. She ripped open Maddox's vest, found the entry wound. Stay with me, Dutch, she said, her voice calm despite the gunfire. You don't get to die. Not after what you learned. She applied the seal, watched it stick, then the hard part. Needle decompression. 14-gauge catheter between the ribs, releasing the trapped air that was killing him. Maddox's eyes focused on her face, trying to speak. Save it, Brennan said, starting an IV line. You can thank me when we're home. The color began returning to his face, breathing slightly easier. Not good, but stable enough to move. Hartford appeared beside them, providing covering fire. We need to go. Now. Together they hauled Maddox to his feet, supporting his weight between them. The 50 meters back to the helicopters felt like 500. They reached the extraction point, a plateau where 2 Black Hawk helicopters waited, rotors already turning. As the civilians loaded, Brennan did a head count. 1, 2, 3. 11 children. 12. Luca. 13. Nina. Everyone accounted for. This time everyone would make it home. But as she turned to board the helicopter, movement in her peripheral vision made her freeze. A teenage boy, couldn't have been more than 16, stumbled from behind cover. Blood covered half his face from a grazing wound. His hands shook as he raised an ancient AK-47, the barrel wavering between Brennan and the helicopter full of civilians. Time slowed. Brennan could draw and fire before he could steady his aim. Every instinct demanded she eliminate the threat. But she saw something in his eyes. Not hatred, not ideology, just fear. The same fear she'd seen in Luca's eyes 8 years ago. Instead of shooting, Brennan lowered her weapon. Go home, she said in Pashto. Go home to your mother. The boy's finger trembled on the trigger. Around her, Brennan could feel her team's tension. Weapons tracking the young fighter. One word from her and he'd cease to exist. But she held their fire with a raised hand. This war has taken enough children, she continued. I've killed enough of your brothers, enough of your fathers. But you can choose something different. You can go home, you can live. For an endless moment, the tableau held. Then the boy's weapon dropped. He stepped backward, then turned and ran, disappearing into the morning shadows. Mount up, Thorne called. Maddox extended his good hand, pulling Brennan into the helicopter as the rotors spun up. As they lifted off, Brennan looked back at the compound. Smoke rose from scattered fires, but the mission was complete. No American casualties. 13 lives saved. The flight to the extraction point took 40 minutes. Luca sat beside Brennan, his hand finding hers and gripping it with the same trust he'd shown as an 18-year-old. The boy with the rifle, Nina said quietly. Why didn't you shoot him? Brennan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains. When she answered, her voice carried 8 years of accumulated wisdom. Because I've killed enough. Because every enemy fighter was once someone's child, and choosing not to kill when you can is sometimes harder than pulling the trigger when you must. They touched down at a forward operating base that officially didn't exist. The civilians would be processed, given new identities, relocated somewhere safe. The operators would disperse, returning to lives where this mission would exist only in their memories. But first came the goodbyes. Luca stood before Brennan, now eye to eye with the woman who had saved him twice. You gave me life twice, he said. How do I repay that? You already have, Brennan replied. Every child who learned in your orphanage. Every mind you opened, every life you changed. That's the repayment. Keep teaching, Luca. That's how we really win. Hartford hugged Brennan. You showed me what real strength looks like. Maddox in a wheelchair rendered a perfect salute despite his bandages. We're equal now, Dutch, Brennan said. No, ma'am, Maddox replied. You're my superior, in every way that matters. Colonel Thorne approached last, moving slowly, his age showing now that the adrenaline had worn off. He held something in his weathered hand. His service medal from the Gulf War. Bronze star suspended from faded ribbon, the fabric worn from years of being carried in a pocket. I can't accept this, Brennan said when she realized what he was offering. Thorne's smile was shaded knowing. That's exactly what Ryland said when I tried to give it to him 12 years ago. Said he hadn't earned it yet. He pressed the metal into her hand, his calloused fingers closing over hers with surprising gentleness. He never got the chance to take it. Died at Valkyrie before I could tell him he'd already earned it 100 times over. But you finished what he started. You carried his legacy through hell and brought it out the other side. Thorne's voice roughened with emotion. This isn't just my medal anymore, Brennan. It's Blake's. It's yours. It belongs to everyone who's learned that the hardest thing isn't pulling the trigger. It's knowing when to lower the weapon. He stepped back, rendering a crisp salute. Blake would be proud. Not of the 197 kills, not of the 26 hours of hell, but of what you've done since, of the lives you've saved, of the boy you let walk away today. That's the real measure of a warrior. Ellis handed Brennan an envelope. Your discharge papers. Master Sergeant Brennan Kincaid was never officially deceased, just missing in action. This makes your retirement official, with full honors. Brennan stared at the papers, seeing her name in print on official documentation for the first time in 8 years. The resurrection of an identity she'd thought lost forever. 8 months later, Brennan stood in her apartment in San Diego packing boxes for a move. Coronado Medical Center had offered her a promotion, head of trauma services, with a mandate to develop new protocols for treating combat injuries in civilian settings. It meant responsibility, visibility, an end to the anonymous existence she'd cultivated. But it also meant purpose, legacy. Her phone rang, unknown number with an international prefix. Hello, Fraulein Hawk. The voice was young male, hesitant, with a heavy accent. My name is Asher. I was the boy, the one you didn't shoot. Brennan sank onto her couch as her world tilted. Commander Al-Hakim was my uncle, the voice continued. He forced me to fight, said if I didn't, he would kill my mother. But you gave me choice. First time anyone gave me choice. Asher's voice broke. You could have killed me, should have killed me. But you spoke to me, told me war had taken enough children, told me to go home. Where are you now? Brennan asked. Vienna, Asher said. With my mother and sisters, we escaped after Al-Hakim died in the fighting. Luca and Nina helped us, got us out, got us papers. We run refugee clinic now. A pause. But I called because I want to study medicine. Like you. I want to help people instead of hurt them. I want to save lives, not take them. And Luca said you would help. Brennan closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 8 years begin to lift. Yes, she said, I'll help you. I was accepted to medical school in London, Asher said. Full scholarship for refugees. But I don't know if I can. You can, Brennan interrupted, if you survived what you survived. If you found the courage to walk away. If you're brave enough to choose healing over hate, then you can do this. After the call ended, Brennan sat in the gathering dusk surrounded by boxes. On her coffee table lay 3 items. Ryland Blake's rifle scope cleaned and maintained, Colonel Thorne's Gulf War service medal, and a new photo of 13 people standing in front of a rebuilt orphanage in Vienna. Luca and Nina in the center, 11 children around them, and in the back, barely visible, a teenage boy with a hesitant smile. Asher, alive, free, choosing a different path. Her phone buzzed with a text. Thorne, team dinner at Anchor Point tomorrow, 1900 hours. That's an order, Master Sergeant. Brennan smiled and typed back. Copy that, but I'm buying the first round. As night fell over San Diego, Brennan prepared for her new life. One where she didn't have to hide who she'd been, where her past informed her future instead of haunting it. But on her kitchen counter lay something that suggested the story wasn't quite over. A single sheet of paper delivered that morning by courier. The letterhead was one she recognized, an organization that didn't officially exist. The message was brief. Wraith 6, your unique skills and experience are needed. Veterans being trafficked from Barrier hospitals. Children of deployed soldiers being targeted. Authorities cannot act. Need strategic consultation. Complete deniability. Interested blackjack. Below it, coordinates in Southern California. Brennan picked up the paper, studying it. She thought of Asher pursuing medicine in London, of Luca and Nina rebuilding lives in Vienna, of the boy soldier she'd let walk away who might find his own path to redemption. She reached for her phone, then paused. Through her window, she could see the city lights spreading to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Maddox and the others were living their lives forever changed. Somewhere, Thorne was probably telling war stories. Somewhere, Hartford was mentoring female officers. And somewhere, children were suffering, waiting for someone with the skills and will to help them. Brennan dialed the number from memory. It rang once. Black Jacket's Wraith, I'm interested. A pause. But I need a team. Send the coordinates to these numbers. She read off contacts. Thorne, Maddox, Hartford, Ellis. Because ghosts work better in groups, and these kids deserve to come home. As she spoke, her reflection caught in the window. Not the tired nurse, not the legendary sniper, but something new. Someone who had learned that true strength wasn't about the ability to kill, but the wisdom to know when not to. After all, she said quietly, ending the call, every ghost needs a purpose. Outside her window, the city lights twinkled, each one representing a life, a story, a possibility. And somewhere among them, moving between light and shadow, a ghost prepared to walk again. Not the ghost of vengeance, but of protection. Not the ghost that haunted, but the one that guarded. Wraith 6 was dead. Long live Wraith 6. The story ends here, but the mission continues. In emergency rooms where trauma surgeons fight death. In refugee clinics where former child soldiers learn that healing is stronger than hate. In classified operations where ghosts protect those who cannot protect themselves. And in a bar called Anchor Point, where warriors gather to remember that the strongest among them are the ones who've learned to walk away from fights they could easily win. Where a woman named Brennan Kincaid, nurse warrior ghost guardian, proved that the greatest strength isn't in how many lives you can take, but in how many you choose to save.